Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's program, and thanks so much for being here. I'm Marcia Eli from the Brooklyn Public Library Center for Brooklyn History and the library's Arts and Culture team, BPL Presents. Tonight, we have the privilege of hosting Lawrence Larry Jackson in a conversation about his new book, an exploration of community, change, and race, titled Shelter, A Black Tale of Homeland, Baltimore. Jackson is the author of the award-winning books, Chester Beheim's A Biography and The Indignant Generation, A Narrative History of African-American Writers and Critics. A Bloomberg Distinguished Professor of English and History at Johns Hopkins University, he founded the Billie Holiday Center for Liberation Arts to create opportunities for enhanced intellectual and artistic relations between Hopkins and his hometown of Baltimore. His conversation partner tonight is renowned filmmaker and author Nelson George, who has written over a dozen fiction and nonfiction books. And among Nelson's film credits are directing the HBO film Life Support starring Queen Latifah and the documentaries Brooklyn Bohème for Showtime, The Announcement for ESPN, Finding the Funk for VH1, A Ballerina's Tale about dancer Misty Copeland for IFC, and an upcoming Willie Mays feature doc for HBO, and that's just a few of the list. I am so excited to hear what these two accomplished creators have to say. But quickly, before I hand it off to them, I want to share a few quick notes for all of you. First, we have put or are putting in the chat a link to the local community bookstore so that you can explore Shelter on your own, and if you so desire, purchase a copy from an independent business. Second, you have the option for closed captioning tonight. Just click that live transcript button at the bottom of your screen. And finally, I hope that you will not just think your questions, but share your questions this evening. Type them into the Q&A box that's also at the bottom of your screen, and Nelson will take as many as we can towards the end of the conversation. And with that, it is my enormous honor to welcome you both and turn it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Hey man, it's a pleasure to, we talked on the phone, but it's the first time we're seeing sort of eyeball to eyeball, so it's a pleasure to see you in the digital flesh.
No, I feel the same way. It's great to be doing this with you, Brother Nelson.
So I didn't realize until I started researching that Homeland is not just a depiction of talking about going back to Baltimore, but Homeland is literally a neighborhood in Baltimore. So could you talk to us about that?
Fascinating play on words, right? No, I would not use that term lightly or innocently, right? That would not be something that would sort of ordinary crop up in my own lexicon, like you know, a kind of a post 2000 or you know, sort of contemporary millennium approach to the planet. Rather, this is the term that was created by a guy named David Malden Perrine, who inherited portions of an estate, purchased portions of an estate, and basically created, you know, a sort of a magnificent series of neoclassical mansions in what was Baltimore County at the time. And this guy was the clerk of the court and was involved in, you know, the great scandal of the Jacksonian era. There was a bank run here in Baltimore that precipitated riots. And in fact, his house was probably burned down by angry depositors who'd been bilked of their savings. But then this guy, you know, he rebounded, he rebuilt. In fact, he built his second mansion was like this sort of marvelous Italianate, again, you know, sort of a Italianate classical design. And it was very, very similar to what Johns Hopkins did about 5 miles away in the Clifton Park. And so if you think of how Frederick Law Olmsted and his team are designing sort of contemporary landscapes in Manhattan and throughout much of the rest of the United States, but also in Atlanta, Georgia, these are the people who were active in shaping the Baltimore City and Baltimore County as it unfolded in the 19th century.
So one of the interesting things is that the book is about you coming back to Baltimore. And I looked up the fact, I think you might have mentioned it in one of your reviews, that where you grew up was West Baltimore.
Sure.
And could you talk about West Baltimore versus Homeland?
Yeah, of course. So we're very proud of this. Those of us from the West Side who can claim the West Side, we feel like we are frontiers people. We're also survivors. We are people who are, as some of our favorite figures from literature, skilled at contending. Maybe that's the way that I would characterize those of us from the West Side. This was the historic part of the city that saw Black middle class migration in the early part of the 20th century. So everybody from my mom's family are leaving rural tobacco, Virginia, and migrating to McCullough Street and to Druid Hill Avenue. My dad is migrating from Danville, Virginia to Druid Hill Avenue. Attending Morgan State University, but living on the West Side, with he and probably the fraternity brothers and that kind of thing. This was the real hub of Black life. This was our Lenox Avenue. This Pennsylvania Avenue was the place where we had, numbers of jazz clubs, Black-owned businesses and restaurants, a real hive of subtlety, to borrow a phrase from Herman Melville. And this is where, Billie Holiday would come and perform. And this is where Louis Armstrong is going to come and perform. This is the place where Black life was thriving and where it had so much of its genesis in the 20th century. However, as the other part of the story is also well known, I have a chair that's named after the former mayor of New York, Michael Bloomberg. Probably my chair could as appropriately be named after Freddie Gray, who lost his life in 2015 and whose martyrdom caused what we refer to as the uprising. So Freddie Gray loses his life really a stone's throw from the church that I grew up in attending and which I still attend today. And this geography, right? It's one of incredible emotional value to us Baltimoreans, and we seek to lift it up. So even though today I live in a different part of the town, I'm still committing myself to doing things like having an annual jazz concert in Lafayette Square so that we can continue to, revive this history, recover this important part of our past. The neighborhood Homeland, you mentioned Frederick Law Olmsted earlier, was part of the Roland Park Company's larger redesigning of sort of northern Baltimore. It is actually connected in a way to the Homewood campus of Johns Hopkins University. The urban geographer named Lawrence Brown has described the terrain of Baltimore City as a black butterfly that has superimposed over it a white L. And that white L is the area of urban development, upper middle class homes, the businesses, the banks, all of the urban investment is along this corridor. And that is where Homeland is, sort of extending out into Baltimore County. This is the neighborhood, or one of the connected neighborhoods is Guilford, where the African-American candidate for governor, Wes Moore, that's where he lives now. But these are the economic powerhouses of the city as it exists today.
So I've kind of jumped ahead, but I wanted to give people a kind of geography of the city. So the book Shelter, A Tale of Homeland, Maryland, is really a book about your return to the city and dealing with the consequences of the history versus the contemporary geography, I guess, of the city. Is that fair?
I think so. Yeah. Like so many of the people, from our generation, terribly moved by the second half of the autobiography of Malcolm X, and to be deigned Omawale is something that one, you live for, right? You are striving to be this person that returns. It's not just about making it yourself. It is very much about your ongoing and everlasting connections to the community that produced you. So yeah, it is very much one of return.
So what made you come back?
Well, sort of, I guess it was a group of things, but one of them was this opportunity to teach at Hopkins and then also to be able to kind of like churning the rudder on the aircraft carrier, but to participate in moving an institution into something like a greater reciprocity with other portions of the city. That was very exciting to me. Most of the places that I taught, even when I was a professor at Howard University in the 1990s, I was living in Baltimore and teaching at Howard. And when I went to Washington, I was always going there almost as a tourist. And I lived in Atlanta for, almost 15 years teaching at Emory University. And you sort of, you live alongside the deep history of these places. And of course, that's impossible in the place where you're from and where your relatives are from and where, your ancestors lay in rest. So to be able to, go back to Baltimore was also exciting in terms of, I guess living up to a particular kind of fulfillment in terms of career, and then also the emotions, living up to the inner person. That was very exciting.
So at what point did this become a book for you as opposed to just a return?
Sure. I think the books choose you, as someone has said. I started out with to try to figure out what this place was like on its own terms. So for example, I took a couple of days and I went to the Eastern Shore of Maryland. So the Eastern Shore is like, that's the Mississippi of Maryland, the Alabama of Maryland,
Sure.
to make a reference to the Deep South. That's the Deep South of Up South. And, going over to the Eastern Shore, of course, you think about Frederick Douglass, and, you're trying to understand how was this person thinking about escape? What was connecting them to the place? What's the landscape like? What are the people who are there? What are they like? And it was just an incredible experience, very rich, but especially rich in irony. In other words, I took a group of students on a sailboat expedition, a literal sailboat. We sailed from Annapolis across the bay to the Wye River, where Douglass, grew up for a portion of his history on the Lloyd Farm. And we had a series of encounters that were memorable. And I won't go into any detail, but the encounters that drove home the reality of race and class this was in 2016 or 2017. And how palpable these realities were in especially the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And so, of course, I had to create an essay about that, or, I had to sort of think in a rich textured way about what that encounter was like. And then it occurred to me that, that perhaps there were some other moments that also had a similar kind of richness, and that maybe there were natural sinews and ligaments that would be tying them together. And then I had the good fortune of winning the Guggenheim Award in 2019 and was able to take leave. And then that, of course, gave me the opportunity to sort of think more systematically about what had been taking place during the many months of my return.
That's funny. I'm in Brooklyn now. I live maybe, I don't know, 3 miles from where I grew up in the projects. I live now in a semi-gentrified part of Bed-Stuy. There's a lot of Black homeowners still, and we're Black homeowners, but there also are new white homeowners. I see kids walking down the street here who never would have been here even 10 years ago, walking down the same street in Bed-Stuy. But I also have this feeling often of ghost, because the subways that I take, the streets that I go down, they have connections to people and events literally I'm a block away from where they shot Do the Right Thing. So I was wondering that did the ghost of Baltimore also, invade your sleep and drive you to write this book?
Certainly, of course. I would say that it's not really possible to be a Black writer from this city and not in another way to be an elegiast or an elegy writer. And in so many ways, that's the foundation of my voice, my creative nonfiction writing voice. it begins because of dealing with loss, dealing with mourning, dealing with grief, and the place often where grief and grievance are so overlaid. So, for me, this is something that I often have the opportunity to sort of voice, like with my young sons. I have one son who's 17 and one who's 14. And as we, sort of walk, ride our bicycles, take the bus, or drive through the city, I'm always saying, oh, wow, it's at this street corner that, this is what took place, or, man, across the street from here, this is the thing that, comes to mind every time. And believe you me, my son, who is 17, who is driving the car, he doesn't want to hear this, right? I mean, he wants to live in another kind of reality. And I think that, his desires for the most part are very healthy, but there's no way that I can't remind him, like, this is what you might encounter from the police, at the hands of the police. This is what you might encounter from other young Black men like yourself.
Yeah.
And, sort of keeping the ghost at bay, inviting the ghost to sit down to a meal, and I guess paying appropriate reverence, sort of conducting the ceremonies and the rituals so that the ghosts know that they're honored. That's a significant part of, I think of what I do and who I am. I will say this: I have one of the most spectacular things for me personally, right at this time, is that I've been able to create, this talk about the Billie Holiday Center for Liberation Arts. And one of the things that I've been able to do is that I fund an artist in residence and an elder in residence. And so our first elder in residence is Charlie. Would be like, technically, I guess he's like my fifth cousin. We have the same great grandmother from Mecklenburg County, Virginia. And but I've known him my whole life, and he and my mother are very close. He was the best man at my wedding. But Charlie is like a school teacher for 40 years. He just retired, and he's known citywide for his incredible commitment to Baltimore's young people. And just to be able to play a small part in cultivating the ancestral memory. I mean, he's always going back to, sort of what took place, immediately in the aftermath of the killing of Martin Luther King or African Liberation Day. He is the person in West Baltimore who has the African Liberation Day celebration, who carries out the Marcus Garvey Day Parade, the Malcolm X Day Parade. But to be able to see some of that living memory make its way into like our archives, and make its way into celebrations. He doesn't have an iPhone, or he just got an iPhone. Make its way into celebrations that can then be, shown on Zoom, and where we can share, some of the video documents and reach a new audience, a younger audience. That has been very special and important. And in some ways, it's kind of the maybe what might be called like the ghost work or the spectral work. Especially people who have so many contacts with people who have joined the ancestors at this point. One of the things that I'm really trying to give myself over to is the preservation of the print material record that's still in private hands in the city. We don't want to lose the records that show what the significance of Baltimore, was, especially during the 20th century.
You talking about newspapers, or are you talking about what kind of literature?
So it would be anything that was on paper, but especially we don't want to lose, things like private correspondence. We really don't want to lose diaries and journals. We want to make sure that if you were working, for the city, as the city ended its policies of segregation and moved into integration, we would have, sort of the very rich print material matter that would enable us to recreate it for future generations. I think that most people don't recognize that, or it's difficult to recall, like this place where I'm talking about having an annual concert in Lafayette Square where I go to church. this is the same neighborhood that produces Thurgood Marshall and Clarence Mitchell. And, of course, we have to invoke Constance Baker Motley, but, without Marshall and without Mitchell, we don't get 1954 Brown, we don't get 1964 public accommodations, we don't get 65 Voting Rights Act, and we don't get 68 fair housing. So the book Shelter, in some ways, like I say this in the final chapter, right? It's the culmination of fair housing. I mean, I'm in the first generation of people in my family to be able to purchase a home, to get the mortgage from the bank and purchase a home outside of a segregationist redlining demarcation. So, you have these historic Baltimoreans who contributed so much to not just the evolution of obviously Maryland, but the nation state, and then in global affairs. But we don't connect them to I think this important place in time.
And one of the things you're really hitting on for me is this idea of I'm in my mid 60s now, early 60s, however you want to call it. And what I'm realizing increasingly over the last few years is the people who were the generation of the civil rights movement, the people who actually made the transition from segregation to integration, are dying off.
Sure.
And that our generation, who are the direct beneficiaries of them, must make sure we keep their legacy alive, not just in the legislative way, but literally telling the next generation about what they did.
Absolutely.
It seems like that's what your book is, part of what your book is about, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those people. Another book that I've always loved, another New York centered book, was Claude Brown's Man Child in the Promised Land.
Sure. Yeah.
And I always, I love Sonny's voice, right? And Sonny is always saying, well, I came out of the house when I was like 8 years old. Right. and he talks about these other people like, man, they didn't get out of the house until they were like 16, 17.
Yeah.
I got out of the house late, right? Relative to Sonny's beautiful language. And as a result of being in the house so long, I revered my parents. I'm not, I don't mean to be, sort of pan-glossy, and I guess with the reference, I mean, we had our struggles and strife, right. But they were remarkable people to me. And my mom and dad, both of them Morgan University graduates, they were inspirational figures, not just to me, but to the young people in my neighborhood. My mother ran into a guy that I grew up with who has known his own troubles, but has triumphed over them. He said, "Oh yeah, we always looked up to Mr. Jackson because he wore a tie to work, and everybody on our street, they wore coveralls when they went out to work, or, worked on cars, or they were landscapers or something like that." And that meant a lot to me. And my dad's generation, he was born in 1932. I always, as soon as I learned about Jim Crow and segregation, and I would always say to them, why didn't you all fight? Or why didn't you fight? And it just took so many years to understand, or to get a little bit closer to an understanding, to approach an understanding. And but the main thing that he would always say to me was that we were conditioned. And it's sort of like, you mentioned the relationships that are necessary for us to be able to deal with and engage the past as a generation, takes its place with the ancestors. But to try to unpack these layers of the conditioning, really, it has been the work that I've done with figures like Ralph Ellison and Chester Himes, and with the generation of critics and intellectuals in a book like The Indignant Generation. I've been trying to sort of figure out, or sort of puzzle my way through, what was African-American life like, sort of around the time of the Second World War and in the aftermath of the post-war. So much of that created the physical structure that still dominates our lives today. And, the neighborhood that I'm living in is in some ways even a throwback beyond the Second World War. I mean, this is the, again, at the time, it was a suburb of Baltimore County, or was one of the earliest suburban neighborhoods. But with the neighborhood, with its geography and its physical structures, designed to, sort of permanently evoke this almost the 19th century past. And of course, that's also what I get into with the history of David Malden Perrine in the book.
It's funny you say that about the getting into the mentality. I'm as it was mentioned, I'm doing a documentary on Willie Mays and trying to get into the head of a guy who came of age in the Alabama of the South, then come to New York in the mid 50s, right, to Harlem, and how that affected how he dealt with race throughout his career. I think it's one of the biggest challenges now is to try, how do you take the woke generation who think everything is entitled to them to have, and connect them to the generations that had no sense of entitlement.
Exactly. That's powerfully put.
Yeah, it's really a big battle. One thing that really struck me, and something another comment you made in some of your writings, is about being a middle-aged Black person. Being a middle-aged Black male, being a middle-aged Black male myself, I was like, oh yeah. So we're not really in the pop discussion. Everything Black is about, the tendency to focus on Black culture is the new thing that we're doing, whatever that may be. And the other stuff is whatever. And there's not a big voice. So I thought that was really interesting. I want you to talk a bit more about that idea of being a middle-aged Black person in this culture.
And you keep looking at Sanford and Son and realize that Red Fox is the same age that you are today, like when he's performing, Fred Sanford, and you're like, wow, this is definitely come full circle. So on the one hand, you have the American fascination with youth culture, right? And the American ability to exploit, sort of the how can we keep turning the commercial point on something, I mean, again, we used to wear our pants baggy, now we wear our pants snug. We used to wear, the hair one way, and now it's another way. So it's always, sort of this change, and then turn it into a commodity, put it on a commercial or advertisement, post to the billboard. And the thing that I've noticed, and a couple of friends of mine, literary critics, have also pointed this out. A brother named Michael Hill has always been after this point. When you look at African-American autobiography and you look at African-American novels, often this is what's dominating the point of view. Well, let's show, in essence, a Bildungsroman. Let's show the person coming of age. Right. Let's see the young woman, sort of triumph over, whatever are the constraints of her household, of the college. And then it's as if by the time the person achieves 30 years of age, the story is over. And, the point of view really with Shelter is like, hey, the story might just be starting there if you think about reproducing a generation, and then what's going to be necessary to launch that generation, even if you are, satisfied with simply reproducing the advantages that you knew. And of course, the world that I grew up in the 1970s, is no more. The things that one could take for granted in terms of public education, after school and recreation programs. Yes, right. I can remember being in pre-kindergarten, or maybe it was kindergarten. It's either in 1973, 1974. And they would bring us lunch on a cart, and everybody got lunch, and everybody got milk in the morning, and then milk at snack, and then milk in the afternoon. And I'm not saying we thought it was lavish. We thought this was normal. Yes. You know what I mean? And, each classroom had a teacher and a teaching assistant. And in the hallways, there were teaching assistants and monitors. There was a structure that was in place that was widespread. And I'm not, obviously, again, I don't mean to be utopian or something, or to say that, everybody, had the same experience, but that nonetheless, things that you could expect from the public commons. And I'm not sure that we have those advantages at this time. I am my son goes to the same school that I went to. I won an academic scholarship. He actually is quite an academician and also athlete. But we're going to Jesuit school, in our household. And to be able to do that, it requires an economic wherewithal that I mean, just in my own sense of things, right? It's mind blowing. If you look at two graphs in the United States, the increase of the prison population, and it's sort of like from 1960 to 2020. And it's sort of a the line is steady and flat at about 200,000 from 60 to about 73, and then it begins. It's greater than a 45-degree arc, and by the time you get to 2000, it is like a 90-degree line, right? It's just going to the roof. The other index that measures that kind of shift where it had been flat and then makes that sort of 45-degree angle turn and then shift into a 90-degree turn is college and school tuition.
Yes.
And so this is the kind of society that we've become. And so in some ways, I mean, hopefully just to get back to the point, Nelson, that in some ways, there are new requirements, or you might add these responsibilities and obligations to the people who are in the middle age. And, I would say we would look very closely to see if it wasn't, if the middle age experience today wasn't different than it had been in other moments. And so in other words, I guess I'm also thinking that perhaps the voice and the experience of middle-aged African Americans has real value at our own moment.
I mean, we're still walking through doors that were opened by the previous generation, but I'm not sure if those doors are still there behind us, and that's what's really very, very sad. I want to hit one more point. You sent me some great talking points. I want to make sure I hit a couple of them because they were really interesting. And one was you talked about Carnegie Woodson. And Carnegie Woodson as an influence on you, or you as an inheritor of the great historian's work. Could you talk about how that idea works in your life?
Yeah, sure. Again, my favorite line from The Miseducation of the Negro is that he says that he goes to school and he said, I learned the inner workings of the philosophy of Marsiglio of Padua, and my classmates were studying, practical business methods, and they today are leading corporations. And he says, I'm out soliciting money for a struggling cause. And so it's that ribald sense of humor of Carnegie Woodson, who never for one day would have considered doing something different, right? But who, at the same time could, look with sort of wry, sardonic, sort of humor at, some of the challenges that he faced. I mean, that really is, sort of what keeps me going. I just think that, we're often struggling uphill in the rain and the wind, but the journey is absolutely worthwhile. My favorite part of the book relative to some of this is a conversation that I had with a young man on the street one day. And I talk in the book about, how much I enjoy, especially now, I guess, I enjoy riding the buses. And I enjoy riding buses in whichever city I'm in, but cities like Baltimore and Washington, D.C. and New York, it's marvelous to ride the buses and to see the urban landscape around you and to people watch and, sort of all the rest of that. And, you don't have to be bothered by, traffic in a certain kind of way. And I was riding the bus one afternoon and I ran into a young man, and, in Baltimore, what they say is that if you see somebody with a fanny pack, or if you, especially is certain age, or you're in a certain neighborhood and you see people with a fanny pack, then, that sends you a signal about what they might be carrying on their person. But everybody has, it's like a little clip on your back pocket. Everybody has a 2-inch knife, right? A 3-inch knife, right? It's sort of like, you have to have, something for your own personal security and comfort and well-being. And you can't gainsay anyone, these necessary protections. I mean, I'm speaking light of
Right.
what's taking place here. I mean, we're in the we're living in another world from most Americans, right?
Mm.
But nonetheless, I'm just saying that I have the capacity, urban eye, to be able to take in some of these features. It's a survival skill that we developed very early on, right? It was a necessary survival skill, and it can make me wary before engaging in public conversation.
Sure.
How far does the conversation go? And anyway, the long story short is that the young people need our guidance, and they need it in structured ways, highly structured ways that lead to deliberate outcomes like, high school diploma, GED, job training and preparation, and the rest of that. But they also need unstructured conversations and guidance, and they need to be able to meet adults and to be inspired by them and to learn about their lives. I was always just so taken aback when someone who was in another generation would sort of take me under their wing, even if it was just for a half hour. Those connections were always so meaningful for me.
Yeah.
And I think after a while, I was able to act in an appropriate and avuncular role with the young person, but it wouldn't have taken place if it hadn't been for the marvel of sort of waiting on the public bus stop.
Sure.
And this is actually for it was a Hopkins shuttle, but everybody uses the Hopkins shuttle, which is nice.
Right.
And another feature that I would like to see the institutions of the United States, but especially these ones that are so finely resourced, I would like to see them participating in creating the terms of renewed public commons.
Mm-hmm. I was curious. I have to ask you this as a Baltimore native and a person who's written a book about Baltimore. How much of the narrative of the city has been written by The Wire and the Simon Productions, and how do you feel about them as a native?
Yeah. So I certainly found David Simon and Ed Burns. I would call it sort of an ethnography. The work was called The Corner. It
Right.
came out in the later 1990s. I thought that was really a remarkable work, sort of deep investigative journalism, history, sociology. There was a dimension of sort of cops and robbers in it. And then to see, again, as a Baltimorean, to see the language make it to the screen, that's a moment of purity excitement. In fact, I was in line to get some food the other day, and I said to the young woman who was cashier, I said, what language, how do you describe an occasion when someone steps in front of someone else in line and takes their place? And she says, oh, you mean he rooted you? And I was just like, I said, yes, I use the same word. And it's just sort of like, where did this language come from? This particular idiom.
Right.
You can tell the Baltimorean by the way they pronounce the word T-O, right? That's like a classic, absolutely classic one. For especially, again, people from the West. It sounds more like T-E-W,
Okay.
Or
Wow.
definitely T-U-E.
Right.
The accent on the vowel there. But I can only applaud them for having the tenacity. And I know that it was incredibly difficult. And I know that you, as a film person, know how hard it is to get these things onto the screen, to be able to convince producers that, man, this story about Baltimore should be shown globally. So I think that's fantastic. What happened, of course, is that as I began to sometimes bring it into the classroom, and I'm talking now about the series The Wire, and I started to look at it, more analytically, the thing that, of course, occurred to me was that, it is dominated by a cops and robbers theme.
Yes.
And there's a polarity there between, good and evil. The thing that's always fascinating, I think, to my vantage on the screen, is that the character that we should be cheering for, Stringer Bell, who is educating himself, uplifting himself, and who has a Black nationalist politics, right?
Right.
This is the one that's supposed to be executed by, these other figures, who you could, possibly describe as at least, the way they used to talk about Donald Trump, malevolent narcissist.
Yeah.
That Omar and brother
Mustafa, I think, was it?
Brother Mouzone.
Muzone, right?
I'm
Yeah.
getting ready to call him Patrick Mahomes, right? Brother Mouzone. You could say that in some ways they're like these singular actors who are only advancing their own interest, right? They're not community folks. They're not bringing the whole group forward. And, they sort of, wanted to celebrate turning Stringer into this, sort of devilish character. And I thought it was fascinating that in that place, the politics of mainstream Hollywood film seemed to me absolutely to take over. And there are other dimensions, right? It's mainly the story of Jimmy McNulty. You never see the inside of his partner Bunk's home or his family.
Which is amazing considering they did like 5 seasons.
They're ancillary, right? We don't need to know that. Yeah. But, nonetheless, I think that they also should be applauded for having the most racially complex TV series of all time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And have also enabled people to get into production and directing, like Sonia Sohn, who are making, I think, also important contributions.
I have a question from Clarence. It says, as a native Baltimorean as well, what suggestions do you offer to get young Black people involved about improving their city? He says not just Baltimore, but other places. But I think we just look at Baltimore since we're. What concrete things do you think that folks can do? Can young people to get them involved in improving the city?
So Clarence, I just respond to this. I'll respond this way. I mean, I just talk about some of the things that I have underway. That'd be the clearest point that I could make, and you can sort of extrapolate from that. Again, my main point is that arts and history are like a common source of community identity that we can draw from, and that we can complicate the lived reality of folks trying to create a new personality, a new future for a city. I mean, again, one with many, many different neighborhoods and, sort of strong divisions. But the practical thing that I am participating in is like, I have been a part of a team where we have successfully secured local archivists who are going into Black churches in West Baltimore and helping the parishioners to maintain their archives so that their stories will be preserved in their own institutions. I've also participated in creating jobs for archivists who are helping to preserve the historical memory of the Afro-American newspaper that had the largest collection of photographs taken roughly between the Second World War and the mid-1970s that that are not digitized or they're not necessarily available to the broad public. And so I'm trying to make sure that like library kinds of people with the skills of preservation are working with our local institutions to maintain the historical memory. And because of the kind of person that I am and the background that I have, these people are all African American, right? And we are definitely trying to get young people involved as much as we can. A place like Baltimore, like a place like New York, and like a place like Boston has an incredible local music scene and music culture. And I'm not just talking about DJ music, though Baltimore club music is one of the strongest musical idioms that's been produced in, started in the 20th century and, being carried out up to the present. But I'm talking especially about like trained jazz musicians. So even though we have, the decline of urban public education and music programs, we still have incredible musicians coming out of this city. Dante Winslow, Warren Wolf, many, many more. We are trying to create venues so that jazz, historic African-American, the classic music of the United States, can be performed and showcased, but especially in Black neighborhoods where it had its origins. And in my view, this is intellectual and edifying. The whole practice of hearing the music out loud and in one's own neighborhood by Black musicians, or mainly Black musicians. And so we have an annual jazz concert in Sandtown. We're hosting a series of lectures, bringing professors to local churches, and again, trying to target broad audiences. And I especially want to include senior citizens, who have done so much of the heavy lifting for our community over the years, along with the young people. And so anyway, I would just encourage for us to keep bending the wealthy institutions into works to build up the public commons.
Here's a great question from Regina. Food is a delightful, important metaphor in your memoir. And in fact, you explore Black American foodways, tracing it back to West Africa, where you lived, its transformation from French influences in Haiti, home of your mother-in-law. She's really read your book detailed here. She just wants to know, what ways do food and culture contribute to the individual and community's well-being?
Well, I happen to, throwing no shade on my own mom, but I was really brought into high civilization through my ex-wife, my mother-in-law, but especially my mother-in-law, who was from a town called Jacmel in Haiti. And, just sort of being introduced to the cuisine of Haiti, which of course is Francophone Caribbean. So, many similarities, but then also, differences in preparation with Anglophone Caribbean was, that was the marvel of my, the last 25 years of my life. And what was fascinating was that since the main spice in Haitian cuisine, or I suppose the outstanding spice, the incendiary spice, is the Scotch bonnet pepper, when I went to live in Cote d'Ivoire, and Ivory Coast, for many reasons, right? Again, it's a part of French West Africa, or formerly French West Africa, so it's not so well known to many African Americans, but the country that's between Ghana and Liberia and is on the coast, actually the country where we actually from, another one that actually from, right? We should know it. When I lived there, my colleagues initially, they were like, oh, we're going to get you some of the food that you're used to, and they would try to come up with things that were not like the local cuisine. And then eventually I was able to convince the woman who was cooking for me, Estelle Kofi. I said, Mademoiselle Estelle, please just make the baule food that you would make at home. And then all of a sudden, these remarkable sauces, sauce vert and sauce da and sauce baule and sauce Glen and sauce arachide, and she would sort of recreate these West African stews, or what may be more familiar to us as a stew, fish-based, again, with pepper, with a green, with a particular kind of a local grain. And it was just very familiar to me already because of my loving introduction to Haitian cuisine by my mother-in-law, Marie Jean-Philippe Osteen, that I was able to sort of see some connections. And then, of course, what happened was that I was able to take it back all the way across the water to the Chesapeake. And I know that we won't have much time, but my hypothesis, right? I'm a professor, so it has to be a scientist. My hypothesis is that Maryland crab soup was originally an African dish, and that it was a much spicier, thicker stew. And I am going to try to see if I can join or enter one of these Maryland crab soup contests, and I'm going to use eggplant and Scotch bonnet pepper and okra, and I'm going to see if I can take the taste and the texture in another way. So we'll do that. We'll pause there and we'll see how that plays out.
That's going to be interesting, brother. It could be a success, or it could be bad. Watch yourself there. Here's an interesting question. Regina, again, she's coming hard. She wants you to speak about, as a middle-aged Black man, maintaining friendships with other Black men. And what does friendship look like now that you're, as opposed to when you were younger? I would just throw in that one of the things that's really bonded me so much in these last few years has been loss, in that there are friends of friends of people who have passed. And we've actually found each other through our mutual mourning for our friends. And the other thing that's helped is cigars. I've become a cigar bar guy. And you find a kind of, because I don't drink, and for those who don't, the cigar bar in some respects is the adult, non-alcoholic way to meet other guys and talk shit.
There's nothing wrong with that. That will make that will extend your life. Arthur Ashe once said that one of the greatest benefits of his life was being able to stay in close contact with childhood friends throughout the complete course of his life. And I guess I must have heard that when I was in my 20s, or maybe it was, something that was, in the air around the time that Arthur Ashe passed away. But that was always really moving to me because, the neighborhood that I'm from, I was trying to hire a DJ yesterday, and the guy, we were talking about, sort of who we knew, and the guy was a music producer, and he was like, "Oh man, I think I know you. Weren't you in the Oxfords?" And the neighborhood that I'm from, everybody was a part of a social group, a clique is what we say.
Sure.
That's the way we describe it. And you had to, there were initiations to join the clique, and then there were also obligations and responsibilities as a member in good standing.
Yeah.
Things that you had to do, and some of the things remain with you, right? And or there were sacrifices that were involved. Is how I would put it. So I became very close to a group of young men, especially in my early teen years, and I had the great fortune to be able to continue to be close to this same group of young people, and so there's a way that I might be a professor at Hopkins, or I might have written this year, Brother Nelson, it will be close to 1 million published words for me. When the next book comes out after Shelter, I might be a writer, but to my friends, right, I'm still Larry from off our block, right?
Sure.
And that is incredibly useful as a way to understand who you are as a human being, the perspective that affords. And then I also have, sort of the good fortune of having known, like at different places, different moments during my education, having been able to become friends with people that were a whole lot smarter than me. And so one of them, is the chairperson of African American Studies Department at Howard today. And it has been, just incredibly rewarding to have known this person and a couple of other, I would say maybe one or two other people like that over many decades.
Yeah.
And so this is the great reward of having lived, to this point. Then the thing that you say too about the in some ways like a mutual shared society around mourning.
Yeah.
I mean, that's always, sort of another dimension of it. Our losses, Brother Nelson, are heavy. People who have reached our age, I mean, it is absolutely ordinary, right? It is common. Oh, so-and-so didn't wake up. We're not sure exactly why this is happening over and over again. And then, of course, we have the crisis in Black men's healthcare, the crisis in colon cancer, the crisis in hypertension and diabetes. These are another dimension of the pandemic, the endemic pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very tough few years for me. A lot of from Greg Tate to Mel Van Peebles, people that Greg being a peer of mine, a guy we work with, just you can't believe. And so what kind of happens around that is that you end up talking to people you haven't talked to in a long time. Because there's a connection of decades that maybe got severed as you went into your life and they went into their life. And then I find that these connections are so wonderful now. You're happy that they're doing well. You're happy that they moved on from whatever they were in and you moved on to whatever you're in, because it means you've survived. You've survived America, which is one of the hardest gigs in the world.
That's right.
We have a little bit of time left. I just wanted to, one other idea that came up is I think I use the phrase the world of illusion and some of the course. So I wanted you to, if you can do that in 3 minutes, can you talk about what you mean by that and how that affects the writing of your book?
Yeah, I mean that would be, of course, be the cherry on top if the book would help to break down, to demystify the world of illusion. You look at somebody behind the wheel of an exclusive car, or they have some wonderful threads, right? They look like they're worth $1 million, or walking into a particular kind of a house, and again, what is it that's behind it? So the book is really hoping to kind of prick this veil of illusion, or this bubble of illusion, so that we can see something that is a little bit more substantive, and try to inspire our actions on the basis of reality, as opposed to the incessant striving for surface that is a huge component of American society at this point. I'm terrified of another economic collapse, right? My retirement is now, thanks to George Bush, right, is fully sutured to the stock market. But nonetheless, right, this idea that, oh yeah, the stock market's gonna go up by another 5,000 points, and you'll be able to drive your gas guzzler, or you'll be able to eat whatever it is that you want, and you'll be able to be a disaster on these human relationships, and there is no repercussion, there is no consequence. I mean, that's another part of the world of illusion. So the book tries to be very deliberate, and get you to recognize cost. And the concluding chapter, I talk about dealing with illness during the rise of COVID, right? And, it's a moment where I'm like, okay, I've got to put something down on paper in terms of a will, because if I don't wake up tomorrow, I want to make sure that, somebody will know what to do for my children. But these are the bare bones realities that we always need to keep getting back to and to address. Do we have a moment for me to read one section before we go?
Go ahead, brother, because we got 2 minutes at least.
2 minutes? This is, again, in the spirit of the elegy, and in the spirit of the ancestor. The first tool I ever borrowed was from Mr. Otis Washington, who lived next door. A tall, dark-skinned man with a shaved head, he was a grandfather to me. Mr. Washington and I used to sit side by side on our porches on Saturday afternoons and listen to the Orioles game on the radio. In the summertime, he wore old gray khaki suits and house shoes. As he sipped his ice water while Eddie Murray stared down another hapless pitcher, Mr. Washington would talk about the world a little. My grandmother, in a rare moment of sport, once referred to him as a patent leather black man, by which I presume she meant a gold toothpick and Stacey Adams shoes. He did drive a Lincoln and dote on his petite wife, who had straight hair like a Native American. Mr. Washington had retired from the steel mill, and he kept his own yard immaculate. To do so, he applied a manual rotary edger, which gave a professional line to the grass, showing a lovely layer of dirt between the cement sidewalk and the healthy wide blade fescue on his yard, tiered like a piece of succulent coffee cake. I had only been able to slope down the sides of our front yard where the grass met the sidewalk using the hand trimmers. We didn't fertilize, and we had weeds taking over the gaps in the concrete. Somehow, banking on our baseball friendship, I asked him one summer afternoon if I could use his edger, and he allowed me the privilege. He did so without hesitation or even any safeguards, which certainly would not have been the way of my other neighbors.
Thank you so much, brother, for being here tonight. Marcia, I guess we're good to go.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
That was thank you so much for letting us eavesdrop on your conversation. It was wonderful. I felt like we were just listening to the two of you talk, and I want to let everybody know that this has been recorded, and we will post it tomorrow on the Center for Brooklyn History's YouTube channel. It's a wonderful book, Shelter, Black Tale of Homeland, Baltimore, and I hope you all explore it on our independent bookstore link. I also want to let everyone know that we have a couple of programs coming up that you may be interested in, especially this one that is coming up in the first week of May it's called Brooklyn's March Towards Civil Rights. And we will have Dr. Brian Purnell, author of Fighting Jim Crow in the County of Kings, and historian Mike Woodsworth, Battle for Bed-Stuy, The Long War on Poverty in New York City is his book. And they're going to be talking about, through the lens of the archives that we have at the Center for Brooklyn History, what they uncovered, what that movement was like in Brooklyn with CORE and other Youth in Action and other movements, grassroots movements, and it's going to be a wonderful program. So I hope that you all will tune into that and explore the other things that BPL Presents has. So, but mostly I just want to thank the two of you for this wonderful conversation, and I wish you great luck, Larry, on the book, and see you in Brooklyn, Nelson, and everyone have a great night.
Take care, everybody.